Travel Through Grief. Travel Through Grief Podcast, Episode 1, When Home Feels Different. Why this podcast exists. Welcome to Travel Through Grief Podcast. I'm your host, Ellen Beckemeyer, and I'm so glad you're here. When you are going through something difficult, many times you look around and realize there is no existing roadmap for what you are carrying. No community that quite fits. No language for what your life has become. Years ago, someone told me, when that happens, you create your own. So I did. Travel Through Grief was born from my own need for connection, perspective, movement, and healing. Not healing in the sense of erasing grief, but healing in the sense of learning how to carry it differently. Today's episode is about some of my story, not all of it, just enough for you to understand why this space exists. I live with what I call stacked grief. More than one loss, more than one life event, more than one chapter that casts big feelings across my life at the same time. Whether you are grieving one thing or many things at once, grief can feel scary, lonely, it can feel disruptive and disorienting, and sometimes like the ground quietly shifted beneath you while the world still expected you to keep functioning normally. One thing I know about myself is this: I can grieve in the sunshine much better than in the darkness. You see, light matters to me. Beauty matters to me. Breathing room matters to me. And I found out travel matters to me. And over time, I learned that grief does not require us to live in permanent shadow. We can carry sorrow and still seek sunlight. That belief became part of the foundation of this podcast. I'd like to share a story with you. Before I understood grief as a word, I learned it through canceled plans. In 1978, my grandparents planned to take my brother and I to Disney World for spring break. I was so excited I could already feel the sunshine and magic in my imagination. But that year, heavy snow canceled school. The days were later made up, and spring break quietly disappeared. The trip never happened. I didn't know it then, but that small disappointment settled somewhere inside me. Sometimes grief began as something simple, something anticipated that never arrives. The following year, in March of 1979, my grandfather passed away. He was my first grandparent that passed. Shortly after his death, we finally took that Florida trip. This time it included Disney World and Pompano Beach, where my great aunt and uncle lived. It was the first time I met them. It was also the only time in my life I ever would. Even in childhood, travel and loss were already weaving themselves together in my story. I just didn't know yet that the pattern would continue throughout much of my life. I was 9 years old when one of my best friend's mothers had lung cancer. I had seen adults sick before, but seeing her lying on the couch felt different somehow. This was the late 1970s when chemotherapy and radiation still felt new and frightening. I didn't understand the science of cancer. I only understood the word itself. Cancer. I didn't understand what it did emotionally to a family. I just knew it kind of frightened me. She was a smoker and still smoking, and somehow that moment affected me so deeply that I've never tried cigarettes in my life. She died not long after I had been at their house. Suddenly my friend had only her dad and 2 younger sisters. I don't remember the funeral. I don't remember much at school during that time either. Life continued in the way childhood life does. We adapted because children usually do. A couple years later, we entered middle school. My friend had been an exceptional student and artist, one of those sweet girls next door the teachers adored. But the first day I saw her at middle school, I barely recognized her. She had this grown-up hairstyle. She had contacts instead of her glasses. She had this confidence that seemed to appear overnight. And what I really was shocked was she was smoking. I couldn't believe any of it. Her transformation stood in sharp contrast to my own, still an awkward phase. Looking back now, I think that may have been one of my first experiences of another form of grief. Not death, but change that quietly leaves you behind. We stayed friendly. I would see her in the cafeteria or sometimes at the bus stop after school. And though we eventually lost touch, she remains one of my first best friends. I still carry love for her in my heart. I know losing her mother at 10 years old had to shape her entire life. And eventually, grief shaped mine too. I have another story. It's about me turning 50. And also my mom's decline and the loss of expected life in that same time frame. I had just turned 50, about 2 weeks before my mother passed away. She had been declining for about 4 months, and the last 2 weeks were especially hard on her. I remain grateful that I was there for all of it, but at the same time, I was enduring my own medical struggles, and somewhere deep down, I knew the stress and emotional exhaustion were affecting me too. When I turned 50, I had imagined something very different for that milestone birthday. Maybe a trip, maybe an experience, maybe just one full day that felt like mine. Instead, my mom wanted us to come to the hospital at a specific time in the middle of the afternoon because she had a gift for me. It turned out they were flowers that she had ordered herself. She was so happy about it. Any other birthday, it would have been fine. But this was 50. One of those birthdays you imagine your whole life. At the time, I felt guilty for my disappointment because I knew she was dying, and I didn't yet realize I only had 2 weeks left with her. But disappointment is a form of grief too. Sometimes grief is mourning not only what happened, but what never got to happen. After my mom died came another layer of grief. That was helping my father through his. He was living with dementia, and grieving alongside someone with dementia is something I don't think we really talk about enough. After 54 years of marriage and 55 years together, one thing that did happen, his heart remembered her. And somehow much of that time, his mind did too. But my mother, my person for 50 years, she was gone. And suddenly I had to learn how to grieve, help my father grieve, manage life, and somehow help myself too. In December of 2018, while we were still reeling from losing my mom, my uncle passed away. So many relatives had traveled for my mom's funeral that I wanted to reciprocate and be there for them too. So my dad, my boyfriend, and I made the 8-hour drive to the Midwest. When I drive alone, I'm comfortable. But when people I love are in the car, somehow I feel responsible for them in a completely different way. They become special cargo, if you can say that about somebody. And this was my first major trip without my mom, and with my father now living with dementia. We stopped halfway in St. Louis and got adjoining hotel rooms so Dad could still have his own room while remaining close to us. I remember taking his room key with me that night because I was afraid if he wandered or locked the connecting door, I needed a way to reach him. Grief changes your nervous system in strange ways. Small hiccups suddenly feel enormous while you are living inside them. But once we reached the funeral and with the rest of the family, something unexpected happened. I could breathe. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't carrying everything alone. My dad's siblings, his cousins, my cousins, all our relatives, they were out there to watch after him too. I knew every person in that room loved him. But then the drive home became another story entirely. My dad's knee started swelling badly during the trip back. He was in a lot of pain. But it was an 8-hour trip. We had a long way to get back home. But we drove straight through the 8 hours just to get him home. The next day I took him to the doctor, and while we were sitting there, his face suddenly started drooping. He was having a stroke. At least the signs of one. Seeing that happen in real life felt surreal and terrifying all at once. So they checked him into the hospital. They were able to drain the fluid off his knee. They were also able to help him with his stroke, which turned out to be a TIA. I met my boyfriend in high school. He had actually been close friends with my first boyfriend. What I didn't learn until decades later was that he had a crush on me back then. I always thought that was kind of funny. We reconnected in 2012 when I ran into him at a restaurant where he worked. At that point in my life, I needed to reconnect with who I used to be. Seeing him that night somehow helped me do that. The hug we shared felt like a hug to myself, one I didn't even realize I needed. The following April, we connected on Facebook. We talked endlessly, and that Sunday became our first date. From that day forward, he became part of my life for the rest of his. After my mom died, I became painfully aware of how short life really is. I wanted us to have experiences together while we still could. So for his 50th birthday, I planned a trip to Fort Lauderdale, since my birthday was apparently disrupted. What I forgot, oh my, was that it was spring break season. At that time, it became one of those funny, chaotic travel memories the couples just laugh about afterward. But after he died, even those memories changed shape. Suddenly, I was carrying stories I could no longer reminisce about with the one person who had lived them beside me. In 2019, shortly after Thanksgiving, he developed a headache that kept getting worse throughout the week. He already had vision issues from a detached retina, but this was different. His vision became so impaired that I had to physically guide him through the house. That Monday, I was determined to get him to the VA hospital. He was a veteran, served in the United States Marine Corps for over 7 years in the original Gulf War. So I wasn't feeling well, so I laid down briefly to rest. He was tired, so he was taking a nap as well. When I woke up later, I walked into the kitchen for water and saw that he was on the couch and had foamed at the mouth. I tried using my pet name for him. I kept calling it over and over, no response. Then his real name. Louder and louder I got. Nothing. In my heart, I knew he was gone. But I acted as though he wasn't. I called 911 and began chest compressions. I continued until EMS and 2 fire trucks arrived about 6 minutes later. Suddenly, my living room was filled with people and machines. And yet, what I remember most is this. Not one of them spoke to me. Not a word. I moved through the house on instinct, gathering phone chargers, getting dressed, preparing for the hospital, because years of caregiving with my mom had trained me what to do. But nobody told me if he was alive or dead. Nobody asked if someone should come be with me. Nobody invited me into the ambulance. I had to assume he was still alive because no one said otherwise. I drove frantically to the hospital by myself. At the hospital, I accidentally entered on the wrong side of the building. At that time, I still badly needed hip surgery, so walking long distances was extremely painful, especially without him. He had always been the one holding my hand during hospital visits with my mom. Now I was walking those hallways completely alone. I sat in a crowded emergency room until they finally brought me into a small private room. I had called so many of my friends, and so many actually came. They began arriving slowly. Then the doctor came in. He was gone. Even though I already knew in my heart, hearing it spoken aloud left me numb. When my mom was about to die, hospice had taught us one thing: to say these 5 things when someone is dying. Make sure you say, I love you. Make sure you say thank you. Make sure you say, I forgive you. And ask, will you forgive me? And most of all, say goodbye. Goodbye is one of those words, it's just sacred. Not see you later, not bye, goodbye. It's a farewell that changes your life forever. And something else grief sometimes brings, especially for caregivers, is relief. Not because you didn't love the person, but because the constant vigilance finally stops. And nobody talks about that enough either. From December 2019 through March 2020, there was a hollow space inside me. Ironically, I had bought us tickets for all kinds of experiences because after my mom died, I had become painfully aware of how short life really was. I wanted 2020 to be the year of experiences for my boyfriend and I. Instead, I found myself giving the second ticket to friends and trying to keep living anyway. One of my best friends from high school and I went to see the Harlem Globetrotters. We got to see Diana Ross. The final Star Wars movie, which hurt because he had been so excited that it was coming and he wanted to go see it. But I had a different friend go see that with me. Later, another friend invited me to a Today Woman magazine celebration near Valentine's Day. It became a kind of Galentine's experience during an otherwise difficult season. Then came March of 2020. At that time, none of us really understood what was coming. Everyone kept saying quarantine would probably only last a couple of weeks. My father was living in assisted living by then, and I had still been visiting him most days of the week. After my boyfriend passed away in December of 2019, those visits became harder because he had usually gone with me. But by March, I had adjusted to doing it alone. And honestly, my emotions during that time were complicated. Because while the pandemic was frightening and isolating, another truth quietly existed alongside it. For the first time in years, I was no longer actively caregiving every single day. And that meant I finally had space to fully grieve. Yes, I stayed up late. I could go back to bed if needed. Sit quietly with my emotions instead of constantly managing someone else's needs. But grief in solitude and grief in isolation are not the same thing. Not being able to reach for people became its own kind of pain. And I remember my last hug I ever had with my dad before the shutdowns. He was 89 years old. Strong in many ways, but after everything he had already been through, nothing felt guaranteed anymore. We hugged tightly that day, very tightly, almost as though some part of both of us knew it might be our last one, even though we couldn't fully admit that yet. I remember exactly where we stood. I remember hoping our separation would be short. And in that moment, I wasn't a 50-year-old woman carrying years of stacked grief. I was just his little girl, holding on to her dad. Later, when my father passed away during the pandemic, even his funeral reflected how much the world had changed. Our family and church staff created a recorded service with a Zoom visitation afterward. And strangely, even inside that grief, there was something meaningful too. People who normally would not have been able to travel still got to attend. we still gathered the best way we could. The pandemic changed more than daily routines for me. It truly changed the direction of my life. Before all of this, I had already spent years being the person others came to emotionally, friends, family, coworkers. I was often the one listening, helping people process difficult moments, or sitting with them during seasons of uncertainty. And then the pandemic arrived at the exact same time I was already carrying enormous grief of my own. The loss of my mom, my boyfriend, caregiving for my dad, isolation, physical pain, surgeries, the loss of work. You see, I also lost my job in this period. The loss of the future I thought I understood. And somewhere inside all of that, I realized something. I didn't want to spend the rest of my life only surviving. I wanted what I had gone through to mean something, not in a performative way, not in an everything happens for a reason way, but in a human way. If I had learned how to sit in difficult emotions, if I had learned how grief changes people, if I had learned how identity can unravel and slowly rebuild, then maybe I could help other people navigate that too. The pandemic gave many of us time to reevaluate our lives. For me, it became a turning point. It really did. A moment where I stopped asking, how do I get my old life back? And started asking, what kind of life do I want to build now? That was when life coaching became more than just an interest to me. It became a direction. It became a calling. A way to take everything I had lived through and transform it into support for someone else. Not because I have all the answers, but because I understand what it feels like when the entire map changes beneath your feet. And sometimes what people need most is not someone standing above them with answers. Sometimes they just need someone willing to walk beside them while they find their footing again. What I didn't understand then was how much grief changes not only your emotions, but your bodies, your routines, your identity, and your sense of safety. After losing my mom, then my boyfriend, and eventually my dad, my life changed externally in obvious ways. The people inside my home changed, the routines changed, the caregiving changed, the silence changed. But internally, everything changed too. My nervous system, my confidence, my health. And one of the hardest parts was that I couldn't grieve with my body whole. You see, I was dealing with real physical pain, mobility struggles. That led to surgeries and exhaustion, so much exhaustion. And limitations at the exact same time I was trying to emotionally survive everything else. Grief is already heavy, but grieving while your body is hurting too creates an entirely different experience. Even simple things become complicated. Walking those long hospital hallways, just carrying groceries into the house. Even sleeping comfortably was almost pretty much out of it. Feeling safe traveling alone, having enough energy to make decisions. And every time I thought I might stabilize, another fire seemed to appear that I had to navigate, mostly alone. You see, in the pandemic, I was working part-time, but I lost my job because they no longer needed me. And when grief stacks on top of grief, losing work is not just financial. It changes your structure, your routine, your confidence, your identity, and your sense of where you belong in the world. Over time, I realized I wasn't just grieving people. I was grieving entire versions of my life. I lost them. I lost my body as I once knew it. I lost my job. I lost the future I thought I understood. and in many ways I lost the way I knew how to walk emotionally through the world. Nothing felt arranged the same anymore. Not my home, not my routines, not my nervous system, not even my confidence in myself sometimes. And when enough grief stacks, eventually you stop asking how to go back to normal, because deep down you already know there is no going back. The question becomes, who am I now? How do I move forward from here? And can I still build a meaningful life from what remains? I think Travel Through Grief was born somewhere inside those questions. I learned that my coach mentor led international and domestic retreats. So one of the retreats that she led was to Italy. That had always been my dream. But what I found out was that with my hip problems in Positano, that the steps that you have to take to get to the villa are the only way you can get up there. So she agreed to change my trip to Italy to one the following spring to Ireland. And what I found was my new home. Home in my heart, anyway. Over time, I started noticing something. Again and again, travel kept appearing at the crossroads of my grief. Sometimes travel was canceled, like Positano. Sometimes it comforted me. Sometimes it became the place where life quietly rearranged itself. And then in 2023, sitting at a kitchen table in Ireland, a conversation unfolded that changed everything. For the first time in a long time, I felt someone understood what I had been trying to survive emotionally. Not fix it, not erase it, not rush me past, just understand. And sitting there at that kitchen table with the friends I went to Ireland with, I realized something. Travel was not helping me escape grief. Travel was helping me breathe inside it. That was the moment Travel Through Grief was born. So before we close today, I want to guide you through a few moments that will become part of our time together here on Travel Through Grief. First, I want to offer you some reflection prompts. Reflection prompts are just gentle questions for you to sit with this week about your own experiences with grief, change, and healing. Then we'll move into the lighthouse story. The lighthouse story is what I consider a quiet moment of calm. My offering of a kind of virtual exhale, a soft place for your nervous system to settle, almost like a massage for the soul after carrying so much emotionally. And finally, I'll leave you with the whisper of permission. One thought, one truth, one small piece of awareness I hope you carry with you into this week ahead. As you leave today's episode, I invite you to gently reflect on a few things. Where in your life have you experienced stacked grief? What loss have you maybe never fully named as grief because it seemed too small, too old, or too complicated? What moments still echo in your body when life suddenly feels uncertain or unsafe? And where, even briefly, have you found sunlight again? If one of these reflections spoke to you, I'd love for you to share it in the comments wherever you found this episode. Your story may help someone else feel less alone too. Naming it matters. So before we end, I want to leave you with the lighthouse story. Maybe your thoughts feel like rough water. Maybe you've been trying to hold everything together for so long that your mind and body no longer fully know how to rest. Maybe part of you feels emotionally lost at sea. The kind of exhaustion that isn't only physical, It's life exhaustion, grief exhaustion, the kind where even after you sit down, your nervous system still feels like it's bracing for the next wave. But right now, I want you to imagine something small in the distance. A light, steady, quiet, not rushing you, not demanding anything from you. Just there. The lighthouse has spotted you. Your turmoil at sea is beginning to settle. You are within range of safe harbor now. Help is here. You do not have to navigate every wave alone. For this moment, let yourself stop fighting the ocean. Let your shoulders soften. Let your breathing slow. Let yourself be carried a little closer to shore. You've already survived so much to get here, and right now, you are no longer lost in the dark. The whisper of permission. You are allowed to rebuild your life, even if it no longer looks like the future you once imagined. Thanks for being here with me in the Travel Through Grief podcast. And when you're ready, I'll meet you in the next episode. If this episode connected with you, I'd love for you to follow our podcast, leave a review, or share it with someone who may need it. Those small actions truly help new podcasts like Travel Through Grief grow and reach more people. And thank you to everyone who has already listened, rated, reviewed, and supported this journey. I appreciate you more than you know. Until next time, keep finding your way forward.